So the man used to put away bad guys for heinous crimes. Will he turn himself in for these shoes? Good God, those are hideous. Truly hideous.
These are Captain America shoes. The boys helped me pick out the colors, and then I have these Release the Kraken socks I got from a grandparent of a student at STEM.
George Brauchler. So now that you're officially out of office, this is what you're doing with your life?
This isn't objectionable in court because I'm not in court.
All right, got it. By the way, do you miss being a DA?
All the time. I do.
What do you miss the most?
First, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it was fun. It wasn't in that way. It was the hardest, most soul-sucking, all-consuming job you can have. It doesn't have an 8 to 5 time schedule to it. Calls, texts in the middle of the night, and it's never about anything good. Like, hey, somebody found $100 in the gutter. Just wanted to let you know. I didn't like that. It's like we found another body in the gutter.
Your job was to put bad guys behind bars. You had to work with the police, sometimes against the police. If they didn't do it the right way, you couldn't prosecute.
That's right, but it was fulfilling. I mean, you got to feel like, even though we don't make widgets and the metrics are tough, right? Like maybe a decrease in crime, maybe the bad guy goes away in an individual case, but at the end of the day, you felt like if you did everything right, justice happened, you're wearing the white hat, you ride off into the sunset only to come back the next day and do it again.
Did you ever have a regret on a prosecution where you go, man, if I had to do that over, I would have pled it down to here like they wanted to, or, on second thought, that guy was just in a bad circumstance, and it was a crime what he did, but because of these political things, I had to do that. Did you have any of those? Yes,
but not because of political things. What happens is when you're a brand new prosecutor and you have no family, no life experience, you're 25 years old, they stick you in county court where there's domestic violence and child abuse and drunk driving. And you don't have life experience enough to be able to judge them for what they are at the moment. And so for child abuse, first-class misdemeanor child abuse, when you're a county court deputy, that's the highest class charge you can prosecute. That is like murder for a county courter. But what you lose the perspective of is once you become a parent, and I've joked around about this a ton, but there's some truth to it, and that is a lot of things that when I was a young prosecutor, I'd go, you can't do that to your kid. Later on in life, after 4, I'd go, what do you do?
Lock him in the dog kennel for a day. But
it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, but there is that life experience thing. And so then looking back as you progress through life and progress through handling more and more serious cases, you look back and think, man, I didn't need to hit that guy as hard as I did, or we could have come up with a better outcome than that. Mercifully, that's not a ton of regrets.
When you say better outcome, do you mean he could have done less time, or that there was a better way to punish him, rehabilitate, get him back into the world? I mean, what does that mean? Because I would hate to think that a young prosecutor goes, that's child abuse. An old prosecutor goes, that's not child abuse. And I would hope it's not that gray that it's, it depends on, what the DA ate for lunch. And I got heartburn, and that's child abuse.
No, it's not quite like that. It's still child abuse, and it still fits the statute. But what you do with someone in that situation. And so, an example I would give is stepdad comes home, finds his 14-year-old boy in mom's face, screaming a whole bunch of profanities and obscenities, and mom's looking scared. Dad comes up, grabs him by the shoulder to shove him out of the way. He loses his balance, hits his neck on a bookcase board, and leaves a mark. They have the conversation, everything's good. Kid goes to school the next day. Teacher sees the mark, mandatory reporter, calls the police. Police come out. What happened? Dad shoved me. I hit the bookcase. They go and they scratch this guy a ticket. Now that is child abuse? Yes. Technically, it fits the statute, but the difference between someone who has been in a situation where you've got kids and it's your wife and all this other stuff, and someone who has no experience may be the difference between, look, you're not going to jail, but maybe you don't need to be convicted of this. Like maybe it's a deferred judgment, or maybe it's we come up with a different charge rather than,
it's not, and tell me if I've got this wrong, you have leeway as the prosecutor. Probably the people who work for you have certain leeway, but also the cop that shows up has discretion as well. And I want to get into this cop having discretion issue in a moment, but so it's not just it's all on you. I mean, the cop could have said, "Hey, listen, if we have to come back here for that stuff, or you're going to be in trouble."
Not as much as you think anymore.
Really?
That's old school. That's the way it used to be. And because of the the over media hyped mistakes that officers made in those circumstances, some of them deserve, by the way, you don't see that as much. And what you see is, and I'm not blaming the men and women in uniform, many times they get in a position, especially with domestic violence, where the statute says, you will arrest. You will arrest. For them to stand up there at the scene of the crime or in the heat of the moment and say, I'm not going to find that this is domestic violence and let it go, the downside risk for them, career-wise, and for the department is too much. Child abuse is akin to that. Very difficult to walk away from that. So I think we have taken away, we've made it so hard for officers to exercise good discretion on the streets. It's easier for them to say, I'm going to stroke the ticket and you can go work it out with Mr. 26-year-old prosecutor. And that's not fair either, but we have a system where we put senior prosecutors in charge of them and hopefully help them along in the process.
It reminds me of the craziness that goes on in government-run schools where the kid is online education and there's a picture of somebody with a gun in the background and you're going to have to be expelled for that because it's against the policy. Nobody, it's not worth me getting into trouble for not standing up and so we turn people into automatons, and at which point we become robots.
That's true, and that's what makes this system less justice-y, right? Like you're no longer seeking justice, you're just marching through things and saying, if this, then this. That's very problematic for this system and our community.
I believe American law enforcement is unique amongst the history of man, and because it goes something like this. There have always been law enforcement officers. They have worked for the king, the queen, the tyrant, whomever. They were empowered because somebody else was empowered. They were not empowered through a legal system based on the Declaration and the Constitution, and that these guys are on the front line of defending America, in that they are empowered through this, and they are among the people that they serve, so that the cop also is your next door neighbor, and you see him at the barbecue. Deputies, sheriffs, the same way. They are amongst the same. Go to any other country. Go to Peru. If somebody steals from you in Mexico, do you go to the cops? No, because they're thugs. Here it is something different, and the more that we make those cops them,
right?
Suicide rates among cops are really pretty high. Divorce is huge. Drug abuse and alcoholism is huge. It's because they're very isolated and they're not part of the community. And so cops now tend to cluster with other cops because they understand each other's world, and it's really easy for a cop to get a us versus them mentality instead of us, we are them. Andy Taylor from Mayberry.
Right.
You're not going to have any problems, but I guarantee you he had the discretion. Otis, just spend the night in,
That's right.
in jail.
Barney,
we won't prosecute. Just make sure you're safe.
Barney only had the one bullet, so he couldn't do a ton of things.
All right. Speaking of cops, you really took exception to a report AG Weiser put out on the Aurora Police. So it is tough being a cop right now, and there are people who are just cop fans. That my dad was a cop, his dad was a cop. Cops can do no wrong. I'm not that guy.
Right.
That being said, what a tough time to be a cop. You're scared to pull the trigger. You're scared to engage. You're scared to do this stuff for a lot of reasons. And there's some bad stuff going on. In Aurora, there's been more than enough bad things going on that the Attorney General here decided to do like a 180-page report on the problem.
So to set the stage, this is all part of this process that we've been living through over the last couple of years, where there's new legislation that not only makes police officers personally liable for accusations against them, and in some circumstances that's probably appropriate, but it's the kind of fear that affects everybody in there when they're making these split-second life and death decisions. The other thing we did, though, is we empowered the AG, much like the United States Attorney General, to have these patterns and practices, investigatory powers. He never had that before. This is just since George Floyd. And so along comes an Attorney General, and I should say as a matter of disclaimer, I lost to Phil in 2018. If I don't say that, someone's going to be like, you're just bitter.
Mind you, I'm bitter.
I'm bitter.
I'm bitter
I'm still bitter. But this is a guy who campaigned on the idea that my criminal justice background was largely irrelevant to the role of the Attorney General, and yet every major thing we hear about from the AG's office at the state level is in the area of criminal justice. Patterns and practices gets empowered to him. After the Elijah McClain case catches fire, he decides, I'm going to point my finger at Aurora and start this investigation. And the report that's generated, and I read through the thing.
The whole thing, page by page?
The whole thing. It is, and not all of it deals with, by the way, police. It also deals with firefighters and the use of ketamine and stuff like that. But the bulk of it, 2/3 plus, is police. And for such an important issue as what role does race play in that intersection between law enforcement and the community, if it plays any role, what is that? I was extremely disappointed and frustrated at the methodology that they used and the conclusions they so willingly threw out to the public, which in essence was Aurora Police Department is filled with racists and they engage in racist police practices. And the statistic that they used for that started with and was really built around the idea that the percentage of African American and black in the population, which is 16.5% Aurora, is far under the number of police contacts, arrests, use of force, fill in the blank, that Aurora PD has.
Because if it's 16% African American, well then 16% of your arrests need to be that. That's the way that's supposed to work.
Which is crack smoke crazy to think of that.
Why is it crack smoke crazy? Because on the face of it, you go, well, you know, people are committing crimes. Black people commit crimes. White people commit crimes. Italians never commit crimes.
No, they're never
but it seems like it feels like it should be that way. Tell me why it wouldn't be.
It's just contrary to the idea of first individual will, circumstance, socioeconomics, and by the way, the paper goes out of its way to say we tried to account for socioeconomics and economics because we looked at the zip codes where these contacts were occurring, and the median income across the entire zip code was consistent enough. That's nonsense to suggest that everybody that's contacted by the police, one, is a matter of discretion, and two, in the place where they live is crazy. In fact, we did at the DA's office a heat map a couple years ago to look at where our property crimes were coming from. I know people will be shocked to know that the bulk number of these were from people who came to us in Douglas County from places called Denver and Aurora. So that's just no good measure of it at all. But the bigger problem that I have is once you've established that as your baseline to say, you need to be under the AG's thumb, because now you've demonstrated a willingness, whatever it is, to engage in these racist practices. If you're that police department, how do you get out from under that? Do you then lower your numbers to reflect the population? I mean, do you have calls out to certain areas where you go, dude, let's not respond to something that low level, because that's gonna jack up our numbers. Do you start making different decisions about who to charge and what to pursue? Because at the end of the day, a guy who doesn't know which table to sit at in the courtroom is gonna sit down and marry up the percentage of population of blacks versus the percentage of arrests and say, well, there's a disconnect there, so you're still under my thumb.
So you said 16% of Aurora is black. What percentage of arrests and crimes are black? In other words, so if it's not 16% of all arrests are black, what is it?
It was roughly the way that the percentage broke down and the way it was described using the terms of the AG's office, their investigatory team, was to say that it was like 2.6 times your representation in the community that you had the chance of being contacted by law enforcement. Now, again, to put that in perspective,
you were being contacted by law enforcement.
And contacted can run the gamut. Like
from being pulled over to you get a call, there's a domestic dispute, you see somebody running down an alleyway and you got to go check it out.
There's arrest, summons, warning, maybe even use of force. All those things can fit into that number. But the FBI just released some data. They do every single year. Anyone can find it online. And if you look at that same contact information for places like Denver, it's higher than Aurora's. If you look at Boulder, it's ridiculous. It is like 6 times more likely to be contacted based on your representation in the community. So,
time out. So, Boulder, I find to be one of the most intolerant communities in Colorado. I think it's downright bigoted. And it's bigoted, they don't like smokers, they don't like Republicans, they certainly don't like us gun owners.
Well, I mean,
and they make us very, we're very much others, out there. But you're telling me that if if the AG actually did the study statewide, he might look at Aurora and going, "Oh wait, you guys are doing really well on this compared to Denver, compared to Boulder. You guys are less than half as anti-black as Boulder."
That is true, based on the numbers, based on the same numbers. But remember, too, in this report, one of the things that the AG focuses on is to say, by the way, we didn't rely just on the numbers. We also, and these are fantastic things to consider, we also interviewed defense attorneys about their thoughts on Aurora's contacts. We also looked at high-profile cases. And I thought, so defense attorneys and media-covered stories are going to drive our perception of how to interpret these numbers. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
They equally talk to prosecutors and police officers?
Never talked to them at all. I think at one point early on when they were talking about practices, they did talk to the unions, but I don't think they talked to them in terms of these specific numbers that they found. Something else that's also noteworthy about this is that when the AG issues this report, it comes at the same time, and this got no media coverage, he has gone out to start to advertise for a ton more positions for the Patterns and Practices unit. So when you say he may look at Denver and Boulder, that's no joke. I mean, this is a guy whose appetite for telling police departments how to do their jobs in a more racially tolerant way appears to have no bounds.
So talk to me about some of these things, because I look at some of these cases and I go, this is wrong.
Yep.
Elijah McClain.
Absolutely.
This was poorly handled from the get-go. Was it racist? I don't know. Was it stupid and wrong? Yes, it was. A guy dancing down the street is not a crime and doesn't. And I think about it. My son has Down syndrome. Yeah. He is not like other people. He does not present like other people, and he could be mistaken for, well, this is normal, and the same thing could happen. I mean, this scares me. These are real issues. But if you're going to live and die on the racial issue, you've really got to have a point of comparison. And if you want to do this, and if you compare it with the rest of the state, what should the reform be? I mean, listen, it seems. Tell me if I'm wrong here. The AG is the state government's lawyer.
That's right.
All right, that's the lawyer for the state. That's our legal counsel. He's not the governor's legal counsel. No. He's not the legislator's legal counsel. He is our legal counsel. So when it comes to representing us in a dispute over water, if it comes to something, one of our laws are being brought up as unconstitutional, he is our attorney. His job is for us. It seems like this turns it completely on its head, and instead of being our in-house counsel for Coloradans, he is now looking to be a behavior modification changer internally to other governments. Which, if Aurora has a problem with its cops, shouldn't Aurora do something about that? Or if not Aurora, if the legislature wants to jump in and say, cops have to do this or that, it just seems so weird to have the role of the AG turn in that direction.
I agree. It's also something that doesn't fit with their skill set. They have a teeny tiny sliver of somewhat experienced prosecutors who handle different types of prosecutions that don't lend themselves to a normal jurisdiction. So they have no background in this. They have no experience in this, and they're being led by a guy who my guess is has never toured a courtroom, let alone been in one. So to understand how these things fit, it's an interesting thing. We also have a federal government that has a civil rights division that operates and does things like this in departments across the country through consent decrees and otherwise already. If they've already taken a look, if the U.S. Attorney's Office has already taken a look at Aurora PD and said, there isn't enough to get us involved here, why have we empowered another person in government to take on that role?
Because our legislature is being run by whack job progressives that are pushing the state farther out than California when it comes to social manipulation. And I grew up here. I've never seen anything like this. Let me throw out my remedy.
Yeah.
All right. So, because I understand there is frustration with cops. There's racial tension between African Americans and a lot of police. To deny that tension is there,
agreed,
and not all without good reason. I think there's stories there that make sense. You talk to my black friends, and they're like, "No, this is." And I will take your word for it. I find a huge difference between a sheriff's office and a police department. A chief of police works for one constituent, the mayor, or maybe the city council.
City manager, too.
City manager. Yeah. Well, if it's a strong mayor, the mayor. Right. If not, it's the city manager.
Right.
Not even the town council. No, it's the city manager. So when any of his guys pull over somebody, it all goes up to the chain of command to that one guy. That one guy needs to please one other guy to keep his job. Sheriff in Colorado, except for in 2 counties, is elected.
That's right.
So every time a deputy pulls you over in a car, it goes up to the sheriff, who's going to go back and ask to be reelected by all the people. I have found that overwhelmingly, sheriff's offices are much more consumer friendly. They're much more engaged in community building. And I think the incentive structure is there. That guy you're pulling over, I'm going to be asking him for a vote. Right. I think the reform is to elect chiefs of police.
Interesting.
That if we're going to do this, and you want to have a Republican and a Democrat, and you're going to go through the process, fine. Then it changes that structure, and you now respond directly to us. And I think we would see a very different situation when it comes to race relations throughout.
And my gosh, Aurora, which is not only the 3rd largest city in the state of Colorado, but according to the census, one of the top couple most diverse cities in America. You're right. You might end up with a chief of police who is far more responsive to that and addresses. And something you said I want to double down on, and that is, in no way am I suggesting that there aren't issues with officers out there either using excessive force or sometimes being motivated consciously or subconsciously by some racial component. But this report did nothing to help discover that. It did nothing to help address how to change it. That's really interesting, John. That's an interesting one. Could you elect chiefs of police?
Of course you can. It's just that the mayors and the city managers like being the sole. We elect our commissioners. We elect our CU regents. We elect coroners. For God's sake, why do I don't know why a Republican coroner is going to find something different than a Democratic coroner. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing to have elected. But the people that are on the front lines of this fight, they ought to answer directly to us.
And frankly, for those folks who are thinking now, watching this, could I be coroner? The only statutory constitutional requirements to run for coroner are you have to be 18, you can't be a convicted felon, and you have to live in the county. That's it. You don't even have to own a Bunsen burner or a syringe, and you can.
You don't have to be a doctor. You don't. I've had a lot of coroners hire coroners.
Wait a minute, coroner Jon Caldara. It's just got a ring to it.
I
don't know.
I was thinking your next elected office.
I'm okay with the cadavers. I'm okay. Yeah, no.
Are you sure about that?
I've seen a lot of dead people.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you actually go to crime scenes?
Been to crime scenes. Been to autopsies. That's just part of the DA thing. Everyone who's been on homicide call as a DA has to go do an autopsy. At least one. Usually, it's more than that, depending upon where you're working.
Why do you have to go? Why does a prosecutor have to go to an autopsy?
Couple good reasons for that. One is it's educational for you to be there in the moment to listen to the medical examiner, and it's never the coroner unless you were in Jeffco or Arapahoe County where they have real medical examiners doing it, to go through and help them and have them help explain, look, this is what I'm doing, I'm taking this out, and then you also formulate questions like, what is this? Is that right there part of an injury we can attribute to a cutting instrument, a blunt object? Is that this? And being there for that process is very helpful to understanding the nature of the injuries and what's going on. In some cases it's obvious, but not in every case. And if there's something there where the medical examiner is just thinking in terms of their role, not how it's going to play in court, you're that person to say, hey, hang on, can you do this? Or can you make sure you document that? Could we run this kind of a thing? So you get to have some interaction.
Did you lose your lunch?
No, interestingly, I didn't. I mean, and I'll give you another example.
I think I might.
A horrible one. The ones in the medical examination were not as memorable to me as being at a scene where there's someone in their last posed position. And so, for instance, without getting too gory, there was a shooting at Arapahoe High School. Sweet Claire Davis had been murdered by a guy. And he took his own life in the library. And I remember walking around that scene, and you just turn the corner around a bookshelf, and there's the guy with, you know, the things missing that are missing when you put a shotgun there. And for just that moment, you're thinking to yourself, Jesus, you know, a couple hours ago, that dude was walking, talking, breathing, having thoughts. You know, he had a mom and a dad and all that.
You know, our first responders and the people who keep us safe, you know, there's a mix of motivations that people go into. I'm convinced there are a lot of cops that go into this line of work because they want the thrill. You know, they watch the shows when they're a kid. And I've asked a lot of older cops about this. And I said, you know what I'm talking about. You're talking about these jerk cops. Yeah. And I've had a lot of older cops say, around 2 years in is really the danger zone, because they've got enough experience, they're starting to feel cocky, you know, they own the world, they're still young, and you know, they haven't been seasoned enough. And they always say the same thing, and I don't know if I buy it, which is they kind of weed themselves out, that nobody wants to partner with them, you know, this, you know. I don't know if that's true, but there's a real difference when you talk to older cops who know how to kind of de-escalate something or have seen it before. Experience matters. Back to the police and the AG. A lot of what the AG does also is sue people. You know, they are kind of a prosecutor for all sorts of things. I got to say, a lot of things I disagree with. Trying to beat up on private businesses for doing all sorts of normal things. And then if they win, they get fines. And those fines, it's great. You know, we just settled this, and poor company has decided it makes more sense just to pay off the AG's office with, you know, $3 million than it is to lose $4 million in legal fees, which is easy to do, and win. It's like, well, no, this is not a business decision. It's not principle. It's just like, I've got to do what's right for my shareholders. Here's $3 million, because otherwise it would cost me $4 million, and which gets very close to a shakedown. Then what happens to that money?
It's such a great question, and I did not know this before I started running for office, but there is a giant, lightly regulated, and I use that term lightly, pot of money, these custodial funds that the AG's office is allowed to accumulate. And some of it is through these negotiated settlements where they'll say, we agree that the funds will be spent in this way, and they end up directing it. And so the AG will sit on a giant pot of money from settlements. My God, we just settled part of an opioid settlement for $1 jillion. And that chunk of that money gets to be determined by the AG where it goes. And so what we have seen over the last however many years the professor's been in office is the use of these funds in politically advantageous ways, to go out to parts of the state where we're going to invest in this, or we're going to give you money for this clinic or this thing. It strikes me as akin to, you hire the hammer, right? The strong arm. You hire Frank Azar. He goes and gets you $500,000 for that motor vehicle accident, and when you're like, where's my $500,000? He says, hang on, I'll spend it for you. I know how to spend this best. You don't. I do. And so the state's attorney, the attorney general, collects all this money on the taxpayer's behalf, on the citizens' behalf.
Because he's our lawyer.
Because he's our lawyer.
He's supposed to be our Frank Azar.
He's our strong arm.
Yeah.
And then he dictates where it goes. It should be money, in my opinion, that goes back to the legislature. They're the ones tasked with, goes into the treasury or something. They're the ones tasked with making those decisions, and they get to be held accountable for them. So what we've seen is this AG's office, more than any other in anyone's memory, has exploded the size of its staffing, its budget, and some of that budget is hard to account for because it's not in the normal JBC process, because it comes through the Joint Budget Committee process, because it's in part of these custodial funds. The governor has some funds like this he gets from time to time from the feds, but it's a very shady way to do business where you and I don't have control over monies that ostensibly belong to us.
So amendment, I think it's 78, which people, if they're watching now, the ballot's probably on your kitchen table, grab it and vote, changes that. And it requires that those custodial funds go to the legislature where we can vote on the people who spend it.
And not just vote on them, we get to know what the heck they are.
Yeah.
We get to see them, we get to ask questions about them, and we get to decide how they get spent. But this idea
and it gets spent in open meetings.
Open meetings.
Which is
open
crucial, so that reporters can be there, it can be recorded, you can see how they're divvying up this money to whom.
And the idea that one person with political aspirations and political debts to be paid can make this decision on their own, that is not how we do business in Colorado or America.
I'm assuming you're endorsing a yes vote on 78.
Yeah, big yes.
Has Weiser come out one way or the other? Do you know?
No, it would be, this one's interesting. I don't know if he could, right? Like, could he come out opposed to this and say, no, I know what's best to do with these monies. This would really
he would come up with a different thing.
Yeah. It would be difficult. I don't think that message sells. I think, my guess is he sits it out. I don't think he offers up, yes, please take away all these funds I get to spend across the state with very little regulation or oversight. That's an interesting question. I don't think the governor's office or the AG comes out. I think they rely on people like the Bell Policy Institute or some of these other groups to come out and say, this would be disastrous for Colorado.
After seeing the governor play with the COVID relief funds,
oh boy,
even his own party was hacked off about one guy choosing here and here and here. It's too much power in too few hands.
And I think the legislature, if you ask them, they don't know about these funds. And the more they know about them, at least the ones I've talked to, off the record, have all said, we should be the ones making the decisions on that money. It's like, that's right, because right now it's a Democrat AG. Imagine what a Republican activist AG could do with all of those dollars. And they're like, that's a very good point.
Republicans can screw up just about anything.
Right.
and for the best of reasons sometimes. After 9/11, the Republican legislature, Republican governor passed a law that created these emergency powers for future governors and for health departments and other departments to have incredible authority. Why? Because look what happens. Emergencies happen, and we won't have time to bring together the legislature to figure out how to, if anthrax is going through the state, we need to act fast, and this is going to give the governor those authority. We see what happens with that. We have shut down our economy for a year by one guy's decision, our governor. We've had health departments of unelected people, closing down private businesses, taking away the right of free speech, taking away the right to assemble, the right to worship, because of something they think is right. Good for them. And when the Republicans ran a bill to pull some of that back, saying that, all right, after 30 days, 90 days, 120 days, the governor has to come and get those powers restored from the people represented by our state reps and state senators. Democrats wouldn't sign on to this because short-sighted, just like the Republicans were back when they passed the damn law. Well, if it's a reasonable guy like our Republican, we don't need to worry. And, well, if it's a reasonable guy from our point of view, like Jared Polis, we don't have to worry. The question is, if the liberals are in charge, how would they feel when Governor Trump has those powers? Or AG Trump has those powers? And I'm always amazed how short-sighted our policymakers are. Yep. They think because they're in a political world, but they're setting policy that is going to have an arc for decades.
This is where the principle thing matters, and I don't think it's impossible. So 2 examples. One, even back when this whole emergency order started, I had said publicly that I thought that Governor Polis would score huge points with almost everybody by coming out and saying, yep, I'm going to use the powers that I have, but put out a bill there, and in the meantime, I will come back to you every 30 days, and we'll have, some kind of a conversation, but put it on the books. I want to give back some of this power. Of course, that didn't happen. When I ran for AG, I campaigned on the idea that we were going to end the use of custodial funds, or at least make them far more transparent and accountable. So it's possible, but there is something about being in power where all of a sudden it's like, I need all this, you know what I mean? I must have these powers.
In order to get the job done. I'm not doing it for maniacal reasons, but, if we're trying to get this done, this is the best route to do it. And if they don't like it, they can always unelect me in 4 years.
Right, and my $25 million, nonetheless.
Speaking about elections,
heard of them.
Are you thinking about anything? Yeah.
Candidly, I was. I wanted to wait to see what the congressional district lines would be drawn. And if you remember, the very first map that they drew had this very interesting 7th Congressional District currently held by Ed Perlmutter, who I like quite a bit as a person. I mean, I'm friendly with Ed.
Oh, it's hard not to like Ed.
Yeah, he's a good dude. Policies, different thing. That had Douglas County and South Jeffco. I've lived in Douglas County for over a quarter century. I grew up in South Jeffco. That looked to me like it had potential for a conversation to have with my family about, hey, does Dad have an election in front of him he could do? That last map, the one that's going to become the one that once the Supreme Court signs off on it, I'm still in Ken Buck's district. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm not going to oppose Ken. Ken's doing a fine job. Ken should keep on going. We've got other battles to fight.
Poor bastard! You don't have a job. You're selling Oriental rugs at a strip mall someplace. It's sad. And look at what you have to wear.
It's a little different. I'm stripping in an Oriental rug place. That's different. It's not. Yeah.
All under the table.
Right. I have some more in me to do. I want to serve. I feel guilty about how much I've gotten from the state and the country. I say the same thing about being in uniform, and that has a shelf life too. I mean, short of another promotion, the military is going to show me the door in May of 2025.
You're in the reserves.
I'm in the Guard right now. And
what rank?
Colonel. Our state's only military judge. I'm a legal advisor for NORAD Northcom. But they're going to show me the door here on May of 2025. And I feel guilty about how little I've been asked to do.
Why do you feel guilty? You're going to have a government pension. Do you understand government? Not only from that, but all your years working in as a district attorney and through that, you are set. I believe. You know, we keep hearing that the war between red and blue states and this, and the next civil war will be between the progressives and the Trump. No, war that's coming are people who are on government pensions, retiring at 56 years old, versus all the rest of us who will work till we die, so we pay the taxes, so that these guys, retired teachers and DAs and
I need para to remain solvent, but I also need more than 8 years of para, which is what you get as the DA. But listen, I never had to deploy to Afghanistan, and this is, I hope my wife's not watching this. I wish I had been asked to do that.
Why is that?
Because when you are in uniform and you've served alongside people who've been asked to do things that put themselves in jeopardy, right, where they're asked to put at risk, and they do this when they raise their hand, everything they've ever had, everything they're ever going to have, and the same is true for their families, you begin to develop this sense of inadequacy. I do, this sense of, I want to be asked to do that too. I want to do my part. I didn't raise my hand to put on the uniform to just march through lieutenant through colonel. I want to friggin' serve. I want to do something. And so when I got asked to go to Iraq, to some extent, there was a little bit of moral relief there. Like, thank God, thank you for sending me someplace where I'm at risk, but I can do something. But then I look at my buddies who I went through ROTC with. They're 3-4-time deployers everywhere. I deployed once, and it's like, come on, ask me to do something else.
It's the same thing. A firefighter who also gets the damn government pension. Actually, I should take that back. Most firefighters get no pension. Most firefighters, something like 70 to 80%, are volunteer firefighters.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So when I see the lavish benefits firefighters get, I go, wait a second, something's wrong here. But you do that because you want to go fight fires.
That's right.
You're a cop. Nobody goes to be a cop in order to fill out racial profile forms of when they pull somebody over, or go to drunken domestic disturbances. Your idea of being a cop is catching bad guys.
That's right.
And if you're going into the soldiering business, you probably want a soldier.
You want a soldier. Same thing with being a prosecutor. Nobody agrees to be a prosecutor to just try DUIs. Important cases, but you're constantly thinking about what's a bigger thing I can do. What's something where I can go get that bad guy that they have investigated and arrested and put them in a place that they should be. So I just have more to give. I want to serve the public. What does that look like moving forward? I don't know yet. I just don't know.
Last question. I'll leave it on this. Looking back on the Aurora shooting and the case that you prosecuted against the shooter, you were looking for the death penalty. You did not get it. This guy will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars, getting mental treatment, but also behind bars. Under the new law, you wouldn't have even tried for the death penalty because there is no more death penalty in Colorado. Do you regret going for the death penalty? If you had to do it differently, what would you do differently? It's a tough haul. We haven't put anyone to death in Colorado for about 23 years, something like that.
Yeah, long time. Thank you, Hickenlooper and Polis. No, I would have sought death again. I think my failure, personally and professionally, was I missed a juror. And I'm not saying they were a plant. I don't buy into any of this conspiracy nonsense. I think that we missed something, this team of 5 great prosecutors, missed something in this juror that maybe if we'd asked better questions or maybe if we'd just paid attention.
What do you mean, this juror? Do you know which juror?
Yeah, we do.
Really? And you know that you were not persuasive to that one juror.
So what we know is on Thursday, August the 6th, 2015, not that this is burned into my brain in any way, they wrapped up, we had closed, they wrapped up their deliberations for the day, and the foreperson had asked, hey, let's take a vote to see where we are on the path here. And they had 10 out of 10s and 2 8 out of 10s. Now, I say presumably all for death because that's what everybody thought. They came back the next day, Friday, August the 7th. They kept deliberating sometime around lunch. They're going to break for lunch. They're going to take another vote, and the foreperson, and we heard this from the jurors we spoke to. Every one of them tells the same story. They said, went around the room and going around 10 out of 10, and then finally they got to this one woman who said, look, I need to make something clear. Last night when I said 10 out of 10, I meant 10 out of 10 for life. I will never vote for death on this case. And so, never. And they were all shocked. She had never voiced any concerns, any hesitation at any of the other stages of deliberations. Not guilt, not the first or second phases on the death penalty path, just in this third one. So they had done something I'd asked them to do at the end of the second section of sentencing. I said, if you ever hesitate or doubt what the right thing to do here is, you ask the court to let you watch that crime scene video again. And it's the worst video you could ever imagine watching. It's like it's this poorly lit theater, and there's someone silently walking up and down the aisles, and you just see life interrupted and then life ended just right there up and down. Horrible. And I knew that nobody would sit through that video. I haven't a second time unless someone was on the fence. So all of a sudden we get word back, they're asking to watch the video. Media people are texting me and they're like, this must be a good sign. And I'm like, this is not a good sign. There's at least one person in there who's hesitating about death because nobody would watch this damn thing again. Nobody. And sure enough, after that, they came back. They said, we have a verdict. We assembled everybody. I think it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I remember sitting in there and listening to the verdict. And it was a surreal moment that I don't think I'll ever forget. As the judge is reading the first words, you hear, you're looking for something. Right. And the first thing he says is, count number 1, first-degree murder, victim Jonathan Blunk. We, the jury, cannot, and as soon as he says cannot, I knew that they didn't have unanimity. And unlike in the guilt phase, where a lack of unanimity is a mistrial and you try it again, a hung jury, there is no mistrial or hung jury in death. It is you either get unanimous or you get life. And I knew it. And the surreal part was, at the same moment in time, over my left-hand shoulder, the parents of the mass murderer and the public defenders start sobbing. And at the same time, over my right shoulder are all the victims on that side of the courtroom. And they start sobbing. And I just remember sitting there looking straight ahead thinking, this may be the worst friggin' moment I've ever had as a prosecutor. I mean, this is the worst.
I understand the victims' families sobbing because justice in their mind not done. Why was the defense sobbing?
Because they'd saved his life. They thought
those were tears of joy.
Those were tears of joy. When we had finished the second phase of sentencing, which was the jury had to find beyond a reasonable doubt that the aggravation outweighed mitigation, and I'll be candid, that's where I thought we were going to lose death. When we got past that, in 2.5 hours, the jury was out 2.5 hours. You could see it in their faces, and you could see it in ours. We thought, we did it. We did it. Because the third phase now is only bringing on the 13 family members of the deceased to talk about the holes that monster blew in their lives, and then to go to the jury with this last phase of what is justice here. And so everybody thought he was going to get the needle. And then when that verdict came out, you could just sense the relief and the joy over having spared his life. And the opposite over here, and having to sit there with a damn poker face looking straight ahead, listening to 23 more counts of that, because 2 murder conviction counts for each of the 12 victims. And so in the after action, when we talked to the jurors and afterwards, listen, this was a death penalty case. This was a death penalty case.
This is a silly question, but I assume when you pick your jury members, you have a certain number that you can kick off.
Yep.
Wasn't one of the questions being, will you vote for the death penalty?
Five pages of a 20-page juror questionnaire that 3,800 people filled out was about the death penalty. And when we individually voir dire them, 6 in the morning, 6 in the afternoon for weeks.
Voir dire them?
Voir dire, asked them questions about being a jury selection. They all answered those things. And so, the issue here is you have these bullets, these peremptories.
Right.
So you rank jurors. The public defenders use a number system, 1 to 7. We used A through F.
Right.
There's no magic to it. You're not going to get your A and B jurors. You just want to make sure you don't get D and F jurors. So you're really looking for somewhere in that B- to C- range.
You get to kick out jurors, but
And they
so
do
does the
too.
defense.
And they do too. And so this was a juror that nobody had ranked below a C or a C-. So and some of the like we saved a couple because you start seeing who's coming up, and we're looking ahead, and I'm like, man, if we kick this person, we're going to get a D or we're going to get an F. Let's not do that. If we kick this person, we're going to do
this terrible analogy. The baseball manager going, do I pull this pitcher out and put in a runner,
right,
knowing that he can't then pitch in the next inning? Is it worth that? Because then the guy coming up to pitch is not as good as the other pitcher, but it's a judgment call.
It is, and so when you ask me what would I have changed, I would go back and figure out a way to have not missed that juror. And again, I don't think it's a conspiracy. I don't think we're planted. I mean, could someone in an abstract at the front end say, yes, I think the death penalty is
Did you ever talk to her afterwards?
No, it's one of the 3 that never talked to us, and we would never pursue them. You don't want to harass a juror, but it's one of the 3 that didn't talk to us. But the other 9 all told us the same story. But at the end of the day, John, this is a 25-year-old man who spent 2.5 months plotting to murder hundreds of human beings when they were most defenseless and unsuspecting. If that's not a death penalty case, then we're not going to have a death penalty anymore, and that's what happened.
And we don't have a death penalty.
We don't.
We didn't have a death penalty before they outlawed the death penalty.
Functionally, that's true. Yeah. Once Dunlap came back, you remember in, about March, April of 2013, and the Supreme Court said, hey, you've had all the due process anyone could ever hope for in this process. Go get your sentence. When Hickenlooper stood up and said, this is really so hard, I guess I'm just going to wait for the next governor to make the hard call. From the moment he did that, you kind of knew we were on this downward slide.
You say downward slide. I understand and respect the argument against the death penalty. The idea that our government, us, takes a life, I have a hard time wrapping my brain around it. That being said, I've never found myself being anti-death penalty. There is something about the justice for the crime that still hits me, but I'm very, very sympathetic to that argument. But I agree. If this wasn't it, was he crazy?
No, he was mentally ill, but he was absolutely sane. And 2 doctors, the court.
He's mentally ill, but absolutely sane.
Yep.
Explain that to me.
Yeah, so, I think there's a common misconception out there that to be sane under the law, you've got to have no mental illness at all. Now, he did. And the differential diagnoses ran the gamut, and many of them touched upon schizoaffective disorder, But at the end of the day, what the law says is we don't care what's afflicting you. If you know right from wrong and you conform the intent to murder after deliberating on it, we're going to hold you accountable.
So you're bipolar.
Bipolar is, yes.
But lots of people are bipolar. Bipolar doesn't mean you don't know not to run the red light.
That's right.
You have mood swings, you have manic phases, you get angry, but you still know what the law is.
And how disrespectful to all those people that have mental illness out there that deal with it and work with us, and we see them every day and may not know, to suggest that somehow mental illness gets you off the hook for your bad behavior. I don't think so.
You might be the right guy. I'm sorry to keep digging into the past. I remember when it was going on, I had thought that the shooter's psychiatrist in school notified the police that he was a danger to himself and others.
No, close call, but no, that's not quite it. So,
really?
So what happens is...
Because if that's the case, then there was a breakdown at the CU Police Department where, what else do you want? We signaled to Flair this guy's in danger.
So this guy is wicked smart, right? Like he's a PhD candidate in a neuroscience program that takes 6 people a year from the planet Earth. So super smart dude. He knows just enough to not tell these mental health professionals anything that will trigger anything more by conduct. And he knows that. So when he says early on through the process of in processing, when he talks to the social worker and she's like, do you have thoughts of hurting people or others? He says, yes, I've had some homicidal thoughts. That triggers a threat assessment set of questions. But he knows enough to say, no, I don't have any fixed targets. I don't have any plan. I haven't acquired anything. I haven't accumulated anything. All the questions that they're trained to ask. And he keeps this going throughout the time. He uses the fact that he fails out of school as the predicate for him to stop seeing mental health professionals, because he's worried if he's just abruptly stopping, they'll come look for him. So he goes to this last meeting with these 2 doctors, Feinstein and Fenton, and he sits down and says, well, I guess this is my last time with you. I'm not going to have health insurance anymore. I'm dropping out of school. And he's unprepared for them to say, wait. We have a pot of money that we can use we'd like to keep seeing you. It won't cost you a thing. Dude's so confused by this and has no response. Without saying another word, he looks around, stands up, walks out of the office, and never sees them again. At that moment, Fenton says, there's not enough here to, do an M1 hold. There's not enough here to do any other intervention, but I want to know more. So she picks up the phone. She calls, I think, the chief of police of CU Boulder, or CU Health Science Center, and says, hey, listen, can you just, look, there's a guy just left my office. I don't know that there's anything here, but could you just run him and tell me, is there something there that we should be worried about? They run him, squeaky clean, not a thing. She then, probably in violation of HIPAA and a whole bunch of other privacy laws, picks up the phone and calls mom and says, hey, mom, I'm so-and-so. His mom. I'm so-and-so. I've been seeing your son, probably a violation, and your son's dropped out of school. She didn't know that. And I just want to know, is he always presented this way? Mom breaks down in tears and says, I've been worried about my boy since he was 11. He has always been different like this, but he would never, ever hurt a fly. And with those words in her ear, she feels like she's scratched enough and says,
feel like she did her due diligence.
Hangs up, and that's it.
She must question to this day her action.
It's even worse than that, because he then goes and writes down a journal that's all online if you wanted to look at it, that he sends to her on his way out the apartment to go kill all these people. And in the journal, he reveals all these things about how he deliberately tried to not answer their questions. He deliberately tried to obfuscate that he didn't want to build rapport with them because otherwise they would know his true intentions. Basically laying out for her, the whole time you're meeting with me, I was planning to murder everyone in that theater, and you didn't know it. And so there was a moment where we're prepping for trial, and she and Feinstein said, can we look at the journal? And I'm like, you can if you want to. You can if you want to. And they said, yeah, we want to see it. And you could just see their faces go wide as they're flipping through these pages like, oh my God. I'm like, that's right.
Did they fail?
I don't think they failed. I think our system failed. I mean, remember, Feinstein is a guy who set up the threat assessment protocol for the hospitals in Baltimore, Maryland. This guy's not some dimwit who just bumbled his way into this. These were folks that you had 2 professionals looking at this. The question is, what could they have done more? I've asked them that. I said, wait a minute. You got a guy who comes into your office and says, I'm having homicidal thoughts. Why isn't he in the rubber room right away? And they said, because 1, the law doesn't let us do that. But 2, if it did, people would stop coming in and telling us these things. And we have a ton of patients that come in and say, I've had thoughts of killing my spouse. I've had thoughts of killing my, and they don't act on them because we're able to get them help. That's what we want to prevent. And then I said, listen, if anyone from the DA's office ever comes in and says they're having thoughts of killing their boss, could you please just call me? Because you treat it however you want. I just want to know. But so they feel like they did everything they were trained to do. They had a spidey sense.
And it sounds like a little more.
They did probably more than they were allowed to do, if Ben did. But they didn't think they had enough to invoke an M1. The other thing that they said was the M1 hold, the mental health hold, involuntary 72 hours. So one of the things that they said was, we might have been able to, let's say we were able to get there. This guy's smart enough that he will say exactly what he needs to say to be released. It wasn't going to be a cure-all. And then we lose this guy. So we don't have him coming in and seeking treatment, and that was our goal. Our goal was to continue to work with him because they thought it was all in good faith. For him, it was a big sham.
It's all terrifying.
Yeah, terrifying. Because he's not the only one out there.
No. But fortunately, we now have the red flag laws, so that'll take care of all that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
George, we were going to talk for 15 minutes. It's been almost an hour.
I love it. Great.
I dislike it quite a bit, but...
Where's our damn alcohol?
That's right. Next time, let's do this with booze. Thank you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate this. Thank you.